Welcome to Sleepy Construction. Close your eyes and let's build. Tonight, we are going somewhere warm, somewhere thick with humid jungle air, somewhere the rain falls in heavy, predictable sheets nearly every afternoon. A narrow strip of land, only 50 miles wide, separates two of the largest oceans on Earth. For centuries, sailors dreamed of a shortcut through those 50 miles, rather than the long, dangerous journey around the entire southern tip of South America. Tonight, we build that shortcut, the Panama Canal, slowly, lock by cubic yard of jungle, cleared, dug, and moved aside, just the way they did through nearly a decade of digging and an entirely different decade of failure before that. If you'd like to keep building with us night after night, a like and a subscribe helps this small channel grow. And if there's a structure you've always wondered about, tell me in the comments. We may just build it together next. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to follow every detail. You can simply let the story carry you quietly, the way ships now drift calmly through locks that took a generation to build. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. The idea of cutting a passage through the narrow isthmus of Panama is far older than the canal itself. Spanish explorers, arriving in the region in the early 1500s, quickly recognized the strategic value of this narrow strip of land, separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. King Charles V of Spain reportedly ordered a survey of a potential canal route as early as 1534, nearly 400 years before construction would actually succeed. For centuries, this remained simply an idea, a persistent dream without the engineering knowledge, financial resources, or medical understanding needed to actually attempt it. The idea gained serious momentum again in the 1800s as global trade expanded and the long, dangerous voyage around South America's Cape Horn became an increasingly costly bottleneck for growing international commerce. Gold rush traffic through the 1850s brought renewed urgency as thousands of prospectors sought faster routes from the eastern United States to California, some even crossing Panama's isthmus on foot or by mule, enduring genuinely dangerous jungle conditions, disease, and difficult terrain, simply to shave months off their journey compared to sailing entirely around the southern continent. By the 1870s, French engineers, flush with confidence following their spectacular success completing the Suez Canal in Egypt in 1869, turned their attention toward Panama, believing a similar sea-level canal could be achieved here too. It's worth pausing briefly on Suez itself here, since understanding exactly why that earlier project succeeded helps explain, by direct contrast, why the same basic approach failed so completely in Panama. Suez, completed under de Lesseps' leadership after roughly a decade of construction, connected the Mediterranean and Red Seas through Egypt's flat, dry desert terrain, requiring no locks at all, since both connected bodies of water sat at essentially the same sea level, and the desert terrain between them required excavation through sand and soft rock rather than the hard volcanic and sedimentary rock that would later prove so troublesome in Panama. Suez also benefited enormously from its climate. Egypt's arid conditions meant minimal rainfall, minimal landslide risk, and crucially, none of the mosquito-borne tropical diseases that would prove so devastating in Panama's humid rainforest environment. This success at Suez earned de Lesseps genuine, well-deserved acclaim as one of the era's great engineering visionaries. And it's entirely understandable, with the benefit of hindsight, why he and his supporters felt confident applying broadly similar methods to a new canal project elsewhere. The mistake wasn't a lack of talent or ambition. The mistake was assuming that a design so well suited to one particular environment would translate successfully to an entirely different one, without accounting properly for just how fundamentally different Panama's mountains, climate, and disease environment truly were compared to Egypt's flat, dry, comparatively benign desert. This confidence, as we'll discover shortly tonight, would prove to be a serious, costly mistake. In 1881, a French company led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the very same engineer whose triumphant success at Suez had made him something of a national hero in France, began construction on a canal through Panama, confidently applying the same sea-level design that had worked so well in Egypt's flat desert terrain. This decision would prove catastrophic. Suez had succeeded partly because Egypt's desert terrain was relatively flat, dry, and stable, conditions allowing a canal to be dug essentially straight through at sea level without requiring any locks to raise or lower ships along the way. Panama offered none of these advantages. The terrain was mountainous rather than flat, requiring far more excavation through solid rock than any sea-level design could reasonably accommodate. The climate was thick, humid, tropical rainforest rather than dry desert, bringing torrential seasonal rains that caused constant, unpredictable landslides into partially completed excavation work. And most devastatingly, the region harbored diseases, yellow fever and malaria chief among them, that Suez's dry desert climate had never presented as a serious threat. De Lesseps and his French engineers, confident from their previous success, significantly underestimated all three of these challenges. It's worth slowing down a little on de Lesseps himself, since his particular brand of confidence proved so consequential to this entire chapter of the story. By the time he turned his attention to Panama, de Lesseps was in his 70s, celebrated across France as the visionary who had made Suez possible against considerable skepticism from professional engineers at the time. This previous vindication seems to have hardened his confidence into something closer to certainty, making him notably resistant to technical objections raised by engineers with direct, practical experience in tropical mountainous terrain. Objections that in hindsight proved entirely well-founded. Several experienced engineers, including some who had worked on early surveys of the Panama route, warned specifically that a sea-level design would require far more excavation through solid rock than initial estimates suggested, and that the region's climate and disease environment bore little resemblance to the dry, stable conditions that had made Suez achievable. De Lesseps and the French public, who had invested enormously in his celebrity and his company's bonds, largely dismissed these warnings, preferring instead to trust the same confident vision that had already delivered one seemingly impossible canal. This confidence proved, in the end, a genuinely costly misjudgment. Construction proceeded for years based on a design fundamentally unsuited to Panama's actual terrain, workers and machinery pouring enormous effort into an approach that mounting evidence increasingly suggested simply wouldn't work as planned. Long before the company was willing to formally abandon the sea level concept in favor of a lock-based alternative. A shift attempted only very late in the French effort, and by then, far too late to save the company from financial collapse. The human cost proved staggering. Historians estimate that over the course of the French effort, roughly 22,000 workers died, the overwhelming majority from disease rather than construction accidents, yellow fever and malaria sweeping repeatedly through the workforce, killing experienced engineers and laborers alike, with no effective treatment or prevention available at the time, since the actual cause of these diseases, mosquitoes, rather than bad air or swamp vapors, as commonly believed in this era, hadn't yet been scientifically established. Workers at the time genuinely believed these diseases spread through miasma, a poisonous vapor thought to rise from swamps and rotting vegetation. Hospital administrators, following this mistaken theory, would place the legs of hospital beds in small pans of water specifically to prevent insects from crawling up, inadvertently creating perfect, undisturbed breeding pools for the very mosquitoes actually responsible for spreading the diseases killing their patients. By 1889, after 8 years of construction, staggering financial losses, and appalling human casualties, the French company collapsed into bankruptcy, having completed only a fraction of the excavation work and having spent nearly 3 times its original budget estimate. This failure became one of the largest financial scandals in French history, implicating government officials who had accepted bribes to help sell Canal company bonds to ordinary French citizens, many of whom lost their life savings when the company collapsed. The jungle over the following years began quietly reclaiming much of what had been cleared, rusting machinery and half-finished excavation slowly disappearing beneath returning vegetation, a genuinely sobering monument to just how badly a confident, experienced engineering team can misjudge an unfamiliar environment. Before American planners settled definitively on continuing the Panama route, a genuine, serious alternative remained under active consideration for years. A canal through Nicaragua instead, following a path that would have used that country's large natural lakes as part of its route, potentially requiring less excavation through solid rock than Panama's mountainous terrain demanded. This Nicaragua option enjoyed considerable support within the United States government and Congress well into the early 1900s, with some officials arguing it represented a more practical, achievable alternative to Panama, a location already associated in the American public's mind with the catastrophic French failure and its staggering human cost. The debate between these two routes grew genuinely heated at times, involving considerable lobbying from supporters of each option, until a somewhat unexpected piece of evidence tipped the balance decisively toward Panama: a volcanic eruption. In 1902, Mount Pelée, a volcano on the Caribbean island of Martinique, erupted catastrophically, killing tens of thousands of people in a single, devastating event that dominated international news coverage for weeks. Around this same time, A smaller volcanic eruption occurred in Nicaragua itself, and supporters of the Panama route seized on this coincidence, commissioning and distributing a Nicaraguan postage stamp depicting an active volcano near the proposed Canal route. A vivid, alarming visual argument suggesting Nicaragua's own volcanic activity posed a genuine, serious risk to any canal built there. This postage stamp campaign, whatever its scientific merit, proved remarkably effective politically, contributing to Congress's eventual decision in '92 to authorize negotiations for a Panama route instead, setting in motion the sequence of events, including Panama's independence from Colombia the following year, that we discussed a little earlier tonight. It's worth sitting with this small, strange detail for a moment. A canal ultimately built through Panama, in part because of a postage stamp depicting a volcano, distributed during a heated congressional debate over which country's isthmus deserved this enormous undertaking. Major infrastructure decisions, even ones as consequential as this, don't always rest purely on the cleanest, most rational engineering comparison alone. For over a decade following the French collapse, the Panama Canal project sat essentially dormant. Its abandoned equipment slowly rusting in the jungle, its excavated channels gradually filling back in with mud, rain, and returning vegetation. Interest revived in the early 1900s, driven partly by growing American ambitions to establish stronger commercial and military presence connecting its Atlantic and Pacific coasts, and partly by ongoing negotiations over exactly where any future canal should be built. Panama remained one leading option, though a route through Nicaragua was also seriously considered by American planners during this period. Panama, at this point in history, was actually a province of Colombia, rather than an independent nation, and negotiations between the United States and Colombia over canal rights proved difficult and ultimately unsuccessful, the Colombian Senate rejecting a proposed treaty in 1903. What followed was a genuinely remarkable, and to many observers at the time, controversial sequence of events. Panamanian separatists, with quiet but real support and encouragement from the United States government, declared independence from Colombia in November of 1903. The United States quickly recognized this new nation, and within weeks negotiated a treaty granting America rights to build and control a canal zone through the newly independent country. It's worth slowing down a little further on exactly how this remarkable sequence unfolded, since it represents one of the more genuinely unusual political origins of any structure we've covered in this series. Panamanian business leaders and local officials, frustrated by decades of what they viewed as neglect from the distant Colombian government in Bogotá, had harbored separatist sentiment for years prior to 1903, entirely independent of the canal question. The failed treaty negotiations over canal rights simply provided the specific catalyst that finally pushed these long-standing tensions into open action. American naval vessels, positioned conveniently nearby in the days surrounding the planned uprising, effectively prevented Colombian troops from landing to suppress the separatist movement, a presence that critics at the time and many historians since have argued went well beyond simple diplomatic coincidence. Philippe Varilla, a French engineer who had been deeply involved in the earlier French Canal effort and stood to benefit considerably from a successful American-led project, played a particularly active role in these events, working closely with both Panamanian separatists and American officials to help engineer the circumstances that led to Panama's swift, largely bloodless declaration of independence. Remarkably, Varilla himself, rather than any Panamanian representative, ended up personally negotiating and signing the treaty granting the United States its canal rights, a detail that struck many Panamanians at the time and since as a genuinely uncomfortable footnote to their new nation's founding moment. Their most consequential founding treaty, negotiated by a Frenchman who had never lived in Panama, rather than by their own citizens. This political maneuvering remains, even today, a genuinely debated chapter of history, viewed by some as a pragmatic solution to a genuine diplomatic impasse, and by others as a clear example of larger, more powerful nations imposing their will on smaller ones for strategic and commercial advantage. Whatever one's view of these political origins, construction itself began in earnest in 1904 under American leadership, inheriting both a partially completed excavation work from the French effort and, crucially, the hard lessons of exactly what had gone wrong the first time. It's worth pausing on the sheer scale of what the United States actually purchased and inherited from the failed French effort, since it illustrates just how much genuine value remained buried within that earlier collapse, despite its catastrophic human and financial cost. The United States paid the French Canal Company $40 million for its remaining assets, including partially completed excavation work, considerable quantities of machinery and equipment left behind in the jungle, extensive geological surveys and engineering studies documenting the terrain in detail, and, importantly, the existing Panama Railroad infrastructure that French engineers had relied upon during their own construction attempt. This inheritance proved genuinely valuable, even accounting for the years of jungle regrowth and equipment deterioration that had occurred during the roughly decade-long gap between the French collapse and the American takeover. American engineers, arriving in 1904, didn't need to start entirely from scratch, surveying Panama's difficult terrain. They could instead study French records and reports in considerable detail, learning directly from documented mistakes, rather than needing to rediscover through their own costly trial and error exactly which sections of the route posed the greatest landslide risk, or which excavation methods had proven most and least effective in this particular combination of rock, soil, and climate. At the same time, much of the specific excavation work the French had completed proved less directly useful than the raw dollar figure might suggest, since a considerable portion of it had been dug according to the abandoned sea-level design, requiring modification or, in some cases, complete reworking once American engineers committed to the lock-based approach instead. This blend of valuable inherited knowledge alongside genuinely wasted, misdirected effort captures something important about this entire chapter of the story. Failure, however costly, rarely produces purely useless results. Even the parts of the French effort that ultimately proved unusable still taught the following generation of engineers something essential about what didn't work, which proved every bit as valuable in its own way as the parts that could be directly reused. Before a single significant shovel of earth could be moved under American leadership, one problem needed solving first. A problem far more urgent than any engineering challenge: the mosquitoes. By this point, medical science had advanced considerably since the French effort. In 1897, British physician Ronald Ross had demonstrated that mosquitoes transmitted malaria, and shortly afterward, American physician Walter Reed's team confirmed that yellow fever, too, spread specifically through mosquito bites rather than through miasma or bad air, as had long been mistakenly believed. This scientific breakthrough arrived just in time to fundamentally change the American approach to Panama. Colonel William Gorgas, a physician with direct, practical experience combating yellow fever in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, was placed in charge of sanitation efforts for the Canal project, tasked specifically with controlling the mosquito populations responsible for spreading these deadly diseases. Gorgas's approach was, in its own way, every bit as significant an engineering achievement as the canal itself, though it's far less commonly remembered today. His teams systematically fumigated buildings throughout the canal zone, screened windows and doors to prevent mosquitoes from entering living quarters, and eliminated standing water wherever possible. Draining swamps, oiling puddles to prevent mosquito larvae from surviving, and even in a detail that would have seemed absurd to French administrators just years earlier, specifically instructing hospital staff to keep bed legs dry rather than sitting in water-filled pans. This public health campaign faced genuine skepticism and resistance at first, since the connection between mosquitoes and disease, though scientifically established, wasn't yet widely or intuitively understood or accepted by ordinary workers and even some administrators. Gorgas persisted, methodically, patiently, applying his sanitation measures across the entire canal zone with remarkable thoroughness, and the results proved genuinely dramatic. Yellow fever, which had killed thousands during the French effort, was almost entirely eliminated from the canal zone within a few years. Malaria rates, too, dropped considerably, though never quite as completely, given the more widespread and harder to eliminate mosquito species responsible for that particular disease. This achievement deserves to sit alongside the canal's more famous engineering accomplishments tonight, as a genuinely equal partner in the project's eventual success. Without Gorgas's patient, systematic sanitation work, it's entirely possible the American effort would have suffered the same catastrophic mortality that doomed the earlier French attempt, regardless of how sound the engineering plans themselves eventually proved to be. Let's slow down for a while and step inside Ancon Hospital, the Canal Zone's primary medical facility, sometime around 1906. During the height of Gorgas's sanitation campaign, a nurse, we'll call her Margaret, drawing on the many American and European nurses who traveled to Panama specifically to support this massive undertaking, moves quietly through a ward built with the same careful attention to Mosquito prevention, as every other building in the Canal Zone by this point. Fine mesh screens covering every window and doorway, carefully sealed to prevent even a single mosquito from entering. Her morning begins with a task that would have seemed strange, even faintly ridiculous to hospital staff working just a decade earlier, before Gorgas's sanitation campaign took hold. Checking that no bed leg is sitting in a pan of standing water and that no vase, bucket, or discarded container anywhere on the hospital grounds holds even a small pool of stagnant water where mosquitoes might lay eggs. This inspection routine, repeated daily across every building in the Canal Zone, represents a genuinely enormous logistical undertaking in its own right. A public health campaign operating at a scale and level of detail that required its own careful coordination, not unlike the engineering coordination happening simultaneously at the Culebra Cut and the Gatun Dam. Margaret's patients today include a mix of construction workers recovering from injuries sustained in landslides or dynamite accidents, alongside a smaller but still meaningful number of malaria cases. Since Gorgas's campaign, however successful, hadn't yet achieved complete elimination of every mosquito-borne illness in the region. She recalls from her earlier years working in Panama before Gorgas's campaign reached its full effectiveness. Wards considerably fuller with yellow fever patients, mortality rates during those earlier years genuinely devastating. Entire construction crews sometimes decimated within weeks by outbreaks that seemed at the time to strike almost randomly, without any clear pattern that anyone could identify or prevent. The change in her own direct professional experience has been remarkable. Where she once expected to lose a meaningful percentage of her yellow fever patients despite her best nursing care, she now sees the disease appear only rarely. And when it does, colleagues at the hospital administration trace its origin carefully, working to identify and eliminate whatever breeding source allowed a mosquito to survive despite the otherwise thorough sanitation campaign. By the end of her shift, Margaret walks home through a Canal Zone settlement that, in just a few short years, has transformed from a place widely regarded as one of the most dangerous disease environments on Earth into a community where families now feel comfortable raising children, a transformation achieved not through any single dramatic breakthrough, but through thousands of small, careful, patient daily tasks. Screens checked, standing water eliminated, breeding sites identified and removed day after day across an entire region for years on end. With the disease crisis brought under genuine control, American engineers turned their attention to the design question that had doomed the French effort from the very beginning. Should this be a sea-level canal or something else entirely? After considerable internal debate among American engineers and government officials, a debate genuinely fierce enough that it required direct intervention and a final decision from President Theodore Roosevelt himself. The project committed to an entirely different approach than the French had attempted, a canal using locks rather than a continuous sea-level channel. This decision proved absolutely fundamental to the project's eventual success. Rather than digging an enormous continuous channel through Panama's mountainous terrain at a single consistent sea level, an undertaking that would have required removing an almost unimaginable volume of rock and earth, particularly through the region's challenging central mountain range. The American design instead proposed raising ships up to an artificial lake, sitting well above sea level, then lowering them back down again on the opposite coast, using a series of massive locks to manage the elevation change at each end. This lock-based approach would still require enormous excavation, particularly through a notoriously difficult section that would become known as the Culebra Cut, but nowhere near the volume that a full sea-level design would have demanded. The plan called for damming the Chagres River, Panama's largest waterway, creating an enormous artificial lake, Gatun Lake, that would serve as the canal's central highland passage. Ships sailing across this calm, elevated lake for a considerable portion of their transit, rather than through an entirely excavated channel. Locks positioned at either end of this elevated lake would then raise ships up from sea level to the lake's elevation on one side, and lower them back down to sea level again on the opposite side. This elegant reframing of the entire problem, working with Panama's existing river and terrain, rather than attempting to flatten and override it entirely, represents one of the Canal project's most important engineering decisions and stands as a genuinely instructive lesson in adapting a design to its actual environment, rather than forcing a previously successful approach onto conditions it was never suited for. Before we follow a single steam shovel operator through an ordinary day, it's worth pausing on a piece of infrastructure that, while far less celebrated than the locks or the great excavation itself, proved absolutely essential to the entire project's success: the Panama Railroad. This railway actually predated the Canal by decades, originally constructed in the 1850s to serve gold rush travelers crossing the isthmus. And by the time American canal construction began in 1904, it offered an existing, if aging, transportation backbone running roughly the same 50-mile route the canal itself would eventually follow. American engineers recognized immediately that this railway would need to be almost entirely rebuilt and dramatically expanded to support the sheer logistical demands of canal construction, and much of the existing track needed to be relocated entirely. Since large sections of the original route soon disappear beneath the rising waters of Gatun Lake, the rebuilt and expanded railway system became, in a very real sense, the circulatory system of the entire construction project, moving an almost unimaginable volume of material continuously throughout the 10-year construction period. At the height of construction, this railway operated on a scale genuinely comparable to a busy modern commuter system, with dozens of trains running continuously throughout each working day, hauling excavated rock and earth away from the Culebra Cut to be used as fill for the Gatun Dam, dumped at designated waste sites, or used to construct breakwaters and other supporting infrastructure elsewhere along the route. This logistics challenge echoes, in its own way, the careful coordination of stone transport we discussed when building the pyramid, and the precise, sequenced delivery of iron components to the Eiffel Tower's construction site. The same fundamental problem of moving enormous quantities of material to exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, without creating bottlenecks that would stall the entire project. Engineers developed specialized railway equipment specifically for this purpose, including unloading cars fitted with a mechanized plow system capable of clearing an entire car's load of excavated material within seconds, dramatically speeding up the unloading process compared to older methods requiring manual shoveling. Alongside the railway, the project relied heavily on dynamite and other explosives to loosen rock throughout the Culebra Cut before steam shovels could efficiently excavate it. Over the full course of construction, workers used an enormous quantity of explosives. Some estimates suggest well over 60 million pounds of dynamite were detonated throughout the project's duration, a staggering figure that made the Panama Canal, at the time, one of the largest single applications of industrial explosives in human history. This blasting work required its own specialized expertise and genuine constant danger. Workers carefully drilled blast holes into the rock face, packed them with precisely calculated charges of dynamite, and detonated them in carefully sequenced patterns designed to fracture the rock efficiently without causing excessive, uncontrolled damage to surrounding excavated sections. Accidents during this blasting work, though the engineers worked hard to minimize them through careful procedure and training, remained a persistent source of injury and death throughout the construction period, an additional layer of danger stacked atop the ever-present risk of landslides and tropical disease. Let's slow down for a while and imagine a single ordinary day in the Culebra Cut, sometime around 1910, at the height of construction. A steam shovel operator. We'll call him Samuel, though we don't know his real name, only that men very much like him, drawn from across the Caribbean, the United States, and Europe, formed the backbone of this enormous excavation effort. Arrives before dawn at the edge of a vast, terraced excavation site, cut deep into a mountain that, only a few years earlier, had stood entirely intact. The Culebra Cut, at this stage of construction, resembles something closer to an enormous, man-made canyon than any recognizable natural landscape. Terraced levels descending nearly 300 feet down to the eventual canal bed, dozens of massive steam shovels working simultaneously across different levels, each one biting enormous scoops of rock and earth from the mountainside. Samuel's steam shovel, a genuinely massive piece of machinery for its era, requires careful, practiced operation. Swing its heavy bucket into the rock face, filling it with several tons of excavated material, then swinging back to deposit the load into a waiting railway car positioned alongside the excavation. This process repeats methodically for hour after hour, each scoop coordinated carefully with the railway schedule. Since the excavated material needs to be hauled away continuously without interruption to prevent the entire operation from grinding to a halt while waiting for empty cars to arrive. It's worth pausing here to appreciate the machinery itself, since the steam shovels used throughout the Culebra Cut represented some of the most advanced excavation technology available anywhere in the world at this time, and their reliable, continuous operation across a full decade of construction stands as its own quiet engineering achievement. These massive machines, primarily built by American manufacturers, operated on rail tracks that could be repositioned as excavation progressed, allowing each shovel to advance steadily deeper into the cut as material was removed ahead of it. Each shovel required a skilled crew to operate, an engineer managing the boiler and steam pressure that powered the entire machine, alongside the operator controlling the bucket itself, coordinating precisely with signalmen who directed the positioning of railway cars waiting to receive each load. Steam power, rather than the internal combustion or electric systems that would come to dominate heavy machinery in later decades, proved well suited to this particular project's demands, offering reliable, sustained power output capable of repeatedly lifting several tons of rock and earth per scoop, hour after hour, throughout each long working day. Maintaining this enormous fleet of machinery spread across the entire length of the Culebra Cut required its own substantial supporting infrastructure. Repair shops, replacement parts shipped from manufacturers in the United States, and skilled mechanics working continuously to keep machines operating, despite the considerable wear caused by constant use in Panama's harsh, humid, corrosive, tropical climate. This combination of steam shovels, an extensively rebuilt railway system, and enormous quantities of dynamite represented, at the time, one of the largest and most sophisticated applications of industrial excavation technology ever assembled in one location. A genuinely modern, mechanized approach to construction that stood in sharp contrast to the more manual, hand-tool dependent methods that had characterized much of the earlier French effort decades before. The engineering challenge here isn't merely digging, it's logistics, remarkably similar in spirit to the careful transport coordination we've discussed in previous episodes of this series. At the height of construction, dozens of railway trains operated continuously throughout each day, hauling excavated material away from the cut to be used as fill elsewhere along the canal route or dumped at designated waste sites. Landslides remained a constant, genuine danger throughout this excavation work. The unstable, saturated soil and rock of the Culebra Cut, weakened further by the region's heavy seasonal rains, would periodically slide, sometimes burying equipment, sometimes requiring weeks of additional excavation simply to clear material that had slid back into sections already considered complete. Samuel and his fellow steam shovel operators developed a kind of grim, practical humor about this recurring problem, joking that they were digging the canal twice, once to remove the material initially, and again to remove whatever slid back down afterward. By the end of a long day's work, Samuel climbs down from his shovel, joining dozens of other workers making their way back toward the workers' housing settlements scattered along the canal route, past commissaries offering food and basic supplies, past hospitals built specifically to treat the tropical diseases and construction injuries that remained. Even with Gorgas's sanitation improvements, a genuine ongoing risk of this demanding work. Tomorrow, there will be more rock, more rail cars, and quite possibly more landslide debris to clear before any new progress can even begin. Rest for a moment in the thought of how many such days, how many Samuels, spread across a workforce that would eventually number over 40,000 people at its peak. Slowly, patiently carved an entire mountain range down to the level required for ships to pass through. The Culebra Cut deserves particular attention tonight, since it represented, by a considerable margin, the single most difficult and dangerous section of the entire canal construction effort. This roughly 9-mile section required cutting directly through the continental divide, the mountainous spine separating Panama's Atlantic and Pacific drainage systems, solid rock and unstable soil requiring removal on a scale that dwarfed every other portion of the project combined. Engineers originally estimated this cut would require removing roughly 53 million cubic yards of material. By the time construction concluded, the actual figure had grown to well over 100 million cubic yards, largely due to the persistent, genuinely maddening problem of landslides, which repeatedly buried previously excavated sections and required additional removal work that hadn't been part of any original plan. These landslides stemmed from a combination of factors specific to this particular location: layers of clay and unstable rock, saturated repeatedly by Panama's heavy tropical rainfall, sliding under their own weight once the supporting material beneath them had been excavated away. Some landslides occurred gradually, slowly deforming the excavated slopes over weeks or months. Others occurred suddenly and dramatically, burying equipment and, tragically, sometimes workers with little or no warning. Engineers experimented with various slope angles and drainage systems throughout construction, attempting to find an angle stable enough to prevent further sliding while still keeping the overall excavation width manageable. This remained throughout the entire construction period a genuinely unsolved engineering challenge, one that required constant adaptation and ongoing excavation work, rather than a single definitive solution ever being fully achieved. Steam shovels, dynamite, and an enormous, continuously operating railway system worked in careful coordination throughout this cut, removing material day after day, year after year, through a section of terrain that seemed, at times, determined to refill itself as quickly as workers could clear it. By the time this section was finally completed, the Culebra Cut, later renamed the Gaillard Cut, in honor of the American engineer who oversaw much of this particularly difficult phase of construction, stood as perhaps the single most physically demanding, logistically complex piece of the entire canal project, a section where the mountain itself seemed to actively resist the very construction effort attempting to pass through it. One particular landslide, at a location workers came to know as Cucaracha, deserves special mention as an illustration of just how persistent and genuinely dramatic this problem could become. This particular slope began sliding gradually in 1907 and continued moving in fits and starts for years afterward, at times moving several feet in a single day, burying railway track and partially completed excavation work repeatedly, requiring engineers to essentially treat this section as an ongoing, unresolved problem throughout much of the entire construction period, rather than a task that could simply be completed once and left alone. Engineers experimented with numerous approaches to stabilize this particular slide, including reducing the slope's steepness, improving drainage to remove water that contributed to the instability, and simply accepting that certain sections would require repeated, ongoing excavation to clear material that continued sliding down from above, even after the canal itself had opened to shipping traffic in 1914. Some historical accounts suggest this particular slide continued, causing intermittent problems for the canal's operators well into the years following the official opening, a slow-motion geological problem that no single construction milestone ever fully, definitively resolved. This particular slide became well known enough among workers and engineers that it lent its name informally to the broader phenomenon of unstable slope failure throughout the cut, workers sometimes referring to any particularly troublesome slide elsewhere along the excavation as behaving just like cucaracha, a small, telling detail suggesting just how deeply this particular engineering challenge embedded itself into the daily working vocabulary and shared experience of everyone involved in this decade-long excavation effort. While excavation continued at the Culebra Cut, an equally enormous engineering effort was underway elsewhere along the route, constructing the Gatun Dam, which would hold back the Chagres River and create the enormous artificial lake at the heart of the entire lock-based design. At the time of its completion, Gatun Dam ranked among the largest earthen dams ever constructed, an enormous, gently sloped structure built primarily from material excavated elsewhere along the canal route, rather than solid concrete or masonry. This design choice reflected careful engineering judgment about the specific conditions at this location. An earthen dam, properly constructed with the right combination of materials and drainage systems, could be built more economically and, in this particular case, more reliably than an equivalent concrete structure, given the enormous scale required and the materials readily available from the ongoing excavation work nearby. Engineers carefully layered different types of excavated material within the dam's structure. A core of less permeable material to resist water seepage, surrounded by layers of increasingly coarse, permeable material toward the dam's outer slopes, allowing any water that did seep through the core to drain safely away, rather than building up dangerous pressure within the structure itself. As the dam gradually rose and the Chagres River's flow was increasingly restricted, the water behind it began rising steadily, slowly flooding the river valley and surrounding lowland areas, gradually forming Gatun Lake, eventually covering an area of roughly 164 square miles, submerging the former riverbed, former settlements, and considerable stretches of jungle that had until quite recently stood as ordinary dry land. This flooding process took considerable time, the lake filling gradually over roughly 2 years as the dam neared completion, submerging the old Chagres riverbed beneath water that would eventually reach depth of up to 85 feet in some sections, forming the calm, elevated waterway that ships would eventually cross as the central highland portion of their transit through the canal. There is something worth sitting with quietly in this transformation. An entire river valley deliberately, patiently flooded over the course of 2 full years, creating an enormous artificial lake specifically to solve an engineering problem Rather than fighting directly against Panama's existing terrain and rivers, the way the earlier French sea level design had attempted to do. In November of 1906, partway through construction, President Theodore Roosevelt traveled to Panama, becoming the first sitting American president ever to travel outside the continental United States while in office, a genuinely significant moment in its own right, separate entirely from the Canal project. Reflecting just how much national importance Roosevelt personally attached to this undertaking, Roosevelt toured the construction site directly, including the Culebra Cut, where he insisted on personally operating one of the massive steam shovels for a brief demonstration, an image that photographers captured and which quickly became one of the most widely circulated and celebrated photographs of his entire presidency, depicting the president seated confidently at the controls of an enormous machine, jungle, and excavated rock visible in the background. This visit carried genuine practical purpose beyond simple public relations. Roosevelt used the trip to directly assess progress, meet with engineers and administrators overseeing the project, and gather first-hand impressions of conditions facing workers throughout the Canal Zone, including visiting Gorges's sanitation efforts and the hospital facilities, treating both disease and construction injuries. Roosevelt's visit also served a genuinely important political function back home, since the Canal project had faced considerable skepticism and criticism in the American press and Congress during its early years. Some critics questioning whether the effort would ever succeed at all, given the well-known catastrophic failure of the earlier French attempt on this exact same route. A sitting president personally traveling to the site and being photographed confidently operating construction machinery offered a powerful, direct rebuttal to this skepticism, signaling clearly that the American government remained fully committed to seeing the project through to completion. There's a small human detail worth including here too. Roosevelt reportedly insisted on touring the construction site despite heavy rain throughout much of his visit, genuinely eager to see the actual work firsthand rather than simply receiving reports and summaries from a comfortable distance. A small reflection, perhaps, of the same hands-on, direct engagement that Gustave Eiffel once brought to his own tower's construction, or that chief architect Hemiunu likely brought to his careful, nightly review of the pyramid's surveying calculations so many thousands of years earlier. With Gatun Lake steadily rising and the Culebra Cut slowly, painstakingly deepening, attention turned to perhaps the canal's most visually and mechanically impressive components. The massive concrete locks that would actually raise and lower ships between sea level and the elevated lake. 3 sets of locks were constructed in total, Gatun locks on the Atlantic side, and Pedro Miguel and Miraflores locks on the Pacific side, each consisting of massive concrete chambers fitted with enormous steel gates, capable of raising or lowering ships in carefully controlled stages. The engineering principle behind these locks, while conceptually straightforward, required extraordinary precision and scale to actually construct. A ship enters a lock chamber through massive steel gates, which then close securely behind it. Water is then either allowed to flow into the chamber from a higher level, raising the ship, or drained out to a lower level, lowering it entirely through the force of gravity alone, without requiring any pumps. A design choice that proved both economically efficient and remarkably reliable over the following century of continuous operation. It's worth slowing down further to appreciate just how elegant this gravity-fed approach truly is, since it represents a genuine engineering achievement in its own right, separate from the more visible accomplishment of the lock's massive concrete construction. Rather than relying on mechanical pumps, which would have required enormous, continuously operating power systems and introduced considerable ongoing maintenance and failure risk, the Canal's designers instead used a network of large culverts built directly into the lock walls and floor, connecting each chamber to the water source above it and the chamber below it. Simply opening or closing valves within these culverts allows water to flow naturally downhill from the higher chamber or lake to the lower one, raising or lowering a ship's chamber in a matter of minutes, using nothing more than gravity and the basic principle that water seeks its own level. This design choice reflects the same kind of patient, careful engineering judgment we've seen throughout tonight's story, choosing the solution best suited to the actual environment and available resources, rather than the most mechanically impressive or technologically advanced option available. A pump-based system might have seemed to less experienced engineers like the more modern, more impressive solution. The gravity-fed system instead offered genuine reliability, requiring no electricity, no mechanical pumps prone to failure, and remarkably modest ongoing maintenance. A design choice that has allowed the original 1914 locks to remain in continuous, reliable operation for well over a century since. The concrete work required for these locks represented a construction effort nearly as significant as the excavation itself. Each lock chamber needed walls thick and strong enough to contain the tremendous water pressure involved in raising and lowering ships weighing many thousands of tons, poured using specialized construction techniques, and enormous quantities of concrete mixed on-site using materials transported specifically for this purpose. The steel gates themselves represented remarkable engineering achievements in their own right. Massive structures, some standing over 60 feet tall and weighing hundreds of tons each, yet designed and balanced so precisely that they could be opened and closed using relatively modest electric motors, the gates essentially floating within their hinges due to their hollow, buoyant construction, dramatically reducing the force required to move such enormous structures. Construction of these locks proceeded largely in parallel with the ongoing excavation work at Culebra Cut and the dam construction at Gatun. Engineers and laborers working simultaneously across multiple sections of the sprawling, roughly 50-mile project. Each section's progress carefully coordinated to ensure that when the time finally came to connect these separate pieces into a single functioning canal, everything would align correctly, both physically and in terms of overall project timing. Let's slow down for a moment and consider the man ultimately responsible for coordinating this entire sprawling effort, George Washington Goethals, the chief engineer who oversaw the American construction project from 1907 until its completion in 1914. Goethals was not the first American engineer placed in charge of this project. Two predecessors, John Findlay Wallace and John Frank Stevens, had each led the effort before him, both eventually resigning, worn down by the sheer scale of the administrative and engineering challenges involved, alongside genuine frustration over bureaucratic interference from Washington. Stevens, in particular, deserves quiet credit here too, since it was during his tenure that many of the project's most important foundational decisions were made, including the crucial shift toward a lock-based design and the massive expansion and reorganization of the Panama Railroad we discussed a little earlier tonight, without which the entire excavation effort would have quickly ground to a halt. When Goethals took over in 1907, President Roosevelt granted him unusually direct, centralized authority over the project, organizing it along military lines, with Goethals himself holding a rank in the Army Corps of Engineers and exercising decision-making power that, in ordinary civilian construction projects, would typically be divided among numerous separate contractors and committees. Goethals adopted a demanding, hands-on management style throughout his 7 years leading the project, reportedly holding open office hours each Sunday where any worker, regardless of rank or role, could bring concerns or complaints directly to him personally. A genuinely unusual practice for a project leader of his seniority, and one that seems to have earned him considerable respect and loyalty from workers across the entire Canal Zone. Despite the demanding conditions and long hours the project required of everyone involved. Unlike Gustave Eiffel, who oversaw his tower's construction from Paris, while also managing an active, diversified engineering business, or Hemunu, whose life and daily routine we can only imagine through educated historical speculation, Goethals remained continuously on site in Panama for the entire 7 years of his tenure, living within the Canal Zone alongside the workers and engineers under his authority, personally touring construction sites regularly, including the Culebra Cut, where landslides and schedule delays remained a constant, pressing concern throughout his time overseeing the project. This sustained, direct presence appears to have mattered considerably to the project's eventual success, allowing Goethals to make rapid, informed decisions in response to the constantly shifting challenges of landslides, disease management, and the sheer logistical complexity of coordinating tens of thousands of workers across a 50-mile construction zone. Rather than relying on the slower, less responsive process of communicating with a distant, Washington-based leadership before major decisions could be made. Slow down once more and imagine a different kind of ordinary day, this time at the Gatton Locks construction site sometime around 1911, during the height of the lock building effort. A concrete worker, we'll call her in this case Estelle, though the vast majority of workers in this particular role were men, drawn largely from the Caribbean island of Barbados and other West Indian territories, forming a crucial and often under-recognized portion of the Canal's overall workforce, arrives at the construction site early joining a large crew responsible for today's concrete pour. The work today involves carefully mixing enormous batches of concrete, using cement, sand, and gravel transported specifically to this site, then directing this mixture through an extensive system of chutes and forms into the massive wall sections currently under construction. This work requires careful timing and coordination. Concrete, once mixed, begins curing relatively quickly, meaning each section needs to be poured, leveled, and properly finished before the mixture begins to set, requiring large, well-coordinated crews working in careful, practiced rhythm together. The physical conditions are genuinely demanding. Panama's tropical heat and humidity making already difficult manual labor considerably more exhausting. Workers taking careful, scheduled breaks for water and rest. A lesson learned partly from Gorgas's broader public health efforts, which extended beyond simply controlling mosquitoes to include broader concerns about worker health and heat exhaustion as well. Workers from the Caribbean, particularly Barbados, made up a substantial portion of this labor force throughout the entire Canal project, recruited specifically because of the urgent need for large numbers of workers willing to endure genuinely difficult conditions, often for wages that, while modest, still represented meaningful opportunity compared to limited economic prospects available in their home islands at the time. These workers faced their own particular set of challenges beyond the physical labor itself. Segregated housing and pay scales that favored white American workers over workers of color, a genuinely uncomfortable chapter of the Canal's history that reflected the broader racial attitudes of early 20th century America applied here within the Canal Zone's own administrative structure. Despite these difficult and often unfair conditions, this Caribbean workforce provided an absolutely essential contribution to the Canal's construction, their skilled labor forming a substantial portion of the workforce responsible for pouring the massive quantities of concrete required for the locks, laying railway track, and performing countless other essential tasks throughout the 10-year construction effort. By the end of a long day's work, Estelle and her fellow workers make their way back to segregated worker housing, tired but aware, in some quiet corner of their minds, that the massive concrete walls slowly rising around them would eventually stand for over a century, still functioning exactly as designed long after every single worker who helped pour that concrete had long since passed away. By 1913, after nearly a decade of continuous construction, the Canal's separate major components, the Culebra Cut, Gatun Dam and Lake, and the 3 sets of locks, were finally nearing completion simultaneously, requiring careful coordination to bring these enormous, separately constructed pieces together into a single, functioning waterway. One of the most dramatic moments of this final phase occurred in October of 1913, when a temporary dituck separating the partially flooded Culebra from Gatun Lake was deliberately dynamited, allowing water to flow through the cut for the first time, gradually filling this final section to its intended operating level. This moment carried genuine symbolic and practical weight. The joining of the canal's central excavated channel with its elevated lake system a visible, dramatic milestone after years of separate, parallel construction efforts finally converging into a single connected waterway. Throughout late 1913 and into 1914, final testing and adjustment work continued across the entire canal system, testing lock gates, verifying water levels, and conducting trial passages with construction vessels and early test ships, ensuring that every mechanical system functioned correctly before the canal's official opening to full international shipping traffic. On August 15, 1914, the canal officially opened. The cargo ship Ancon making the first official transit from the Atlantic to the Pacific, passing through the completed lock systems and across Gatun Lake in a journey that would have previously required weeks sailing around the entire southern tip of South America, now accomplished in a single day. The Ancon's transit itself proceeded with far less ceremony than the decade of difficult, costly construction preceding it might have suggested. The ship departed from Cristobal on the Atlantic side in the early morning, carrying a modest group of officials and observers rather than any large celebratory crowd, and proceeded steadily through Gatun locks, across the lake, through the Culebra Cut, and finally through Pedro, Miguel, and Miraflores locks on the Pacific side, arriving at Panama City roughly 9 hours after departing, having crossed an entire continent's width in less time than many ordinary workdays. Goethals himself, along with many of the engineers who had spent years of their lives on this project, watched the transit unfold with what observers described as quiet, understated satisfaction rather than dramatic celebration. A fitting tone, perhaps, for a project whose success had been built not on any single triumphant moment, but on thousands of individually unremarkable days of careful, patient labor stretched across a full decade. The opening, notably, occurred with relatively little international fanfare, since it coincided almost exactly with the outbreak of the First World War in Europe, an enormous global event that inevitably overshadowed international news coverage of the canal's completion, despite the genuinely historic nature of the achievement itself. There's a particular irony worth sitting with here tonight. A project explicitly intended to shrink the distance between the world's oceans, to bring nations and economies into closer, faster contact with one another, open to the world at almost the exact moment that same world plunged into one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. Cooperation and connection arriving quietly in the very same summer that division and conflict arrived as well, each unfolding largely independent of the other, on opposite sides of an ocean that ships could now cross so very much faster than ever before. Before we continue toward the canal's legacy and its life today, it's worth pausing honestly and directly on the genuine human cost of this project, a cost this series has touched on with each of our previous structures, but one that deserves particular direct attention here tonight. Between the French and American construction efforts combined, estimates suggest that well over 25,000 workers died during the canal's construction, the overwhelming majority during the earlier French period, primarily from yellow fever and malaria, before Gorgas's sanitation work brought these diseases under meaningful control. Even during the more successful American construction period, several thousand additional workers died from a combination of remaining disease risk, construction accidents, dynamite explosions, and the ever-present danger of landslides at the Culebra Cut. This human cost fell disproportionately on workers from the Caribbean and other parts of Latin America, who made up the overwhelming majority of the manual labor force throughout construction, working under genuinely difficult conditions, for lower wages and under harsher treatment than their white American counterparts, within a labor system that reflected the broader racial inequalities of this particular historical era. This system, formerly known as the gold roll and silver roll payment structure, deserves particular, honest attention tonight. Workers classified under the gold roll, overwhelmingly white American citizens, employed primarily in skilled engineering, administrative and supervisory roles, received considerably higher pay, better housing, and access to superior medical facilities. Workers classified under the silver roll, overwhelmingly black workers from the Caribbean, alongside other workers of color from across Latin America and elsewhere, performed the majority of the difficult manual labor throughout construction for substantially lower wages, in segregated housing, with access to separate, generally inferior medical facilities. This naming convention itself, drawing on the different metals once used to pay these two groups, reflected a rigid, explicitly race-based hierarchy embedded directly into the Canal Zone's administrative structure, a system that governed nearly every aspect of daily life for workers throughout the 10-year construction period, from housing assignments to medical care to something as basic as which commissary store a worker was permitted to shop at. Despite these genuinely unjust conditions, silver roll workers performed an absolutely indispensable share of the labor that made the canal possible. Historians estimate that workers of West Indian origin, predominantly from Barbados, Jamaica, and other Caribbean islands, made up somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the entire workforce at various points throughout construction, meaning the overwhelming majority of the actual physical labor, from operating jackhammers to pouring concrete to laying railway track, was performed by workers who received a fraction of the pay and recognition given to their gold roll counterparts. Let's slow down for a moment and follow the journey of a single recruited worker traveling from his home in Barbados toward Panama sometime around 1906, as recruitment for the Canal project reached its peak. A young man, we'll call him Joseph, representing the many thousands of real Barbadian men who made this same journey, hears, through word passed along his village, that agents representing the Panama Canal Commission are actively recruiting workers, offering wages that, while modest by American standards, represent a genuinely significant opportunity compared to the limited economic prospects available to him at home, where sugar plantation work offers little chance of saving meaningfully toward any kind of independent future. Joseph gathers what few possessions he owns, says goodbye to family, who will not see him again for years, if at all, and boards a ship bound for Panama, joining dozens of other young men from his island, making this same uncertain journey, most of them never having traveled beyond Barbados's own shores before this moment. The journey itself takes several days, ships arriving regularly throughout the recruitment period, carrying thousands of Caribbean workers toward a country and climate entirely unfamiliar to them, toward a construction project whose scale none of them can fully picture until they actually arrive and see the Culebra Cut's enormous excavated terraces with their own eyes for the first time. Upon arrival, Joseph and his fellow recruits undergo a brief medical inspection, a legacy of Gorgas's continuing efforts to identify and treat illness before it can spread through the densely packed worker housing, before being assigned to a labor gang and directed towards segregated silver roll housing, considerably more basic than the accommodations provided to gold roll workers arriving from the United States. Despite the genuinely difficult conditions awaiting him, Joseph, like many of his fellow Caribbean workers, commits to sending a meaningful portion of his modest wages back home to family in Barbados, a pattern of labor migration and remittance that would come to define this entire chapter of Caribbean economic history, the Canal project representing, for an entire generation of young West Indian men, one of the most significant sources of paid employment available anywhere in their region during this particular decade. Many of these workers, including quite possibly Joseph himself, would remain in Panama permanently once construction concluded, rather than returning home, gradually building new lives, new families, and new communities in a country that, whatever the genuine unfairness of its labor system during construction, nonetheless became home to a substantial and enduring West Indian diaspora, whose descendants remain a meaningful part of Panamanian society and culture to this day. Many of these Caribbean workers, once construction concluded, chose to remain permanently in Panama, forming communities that continue to exist today, their descendants representing a genuinely significant and lasting part of modern Panamanian society and culture, a quieter, more enduring legacy of the canal's construction than the locks or the lake themselves, though one far less commonly discussed in popular retellings of this story. It's worth sitting with this honestly tonight, rather than passing over it quickly in favor of the canal's more celebrated engineering triumphs. The locks, the dam, the enormous excavation at Culebra Cut, all of it represents genuine human achievement, but also genuine human sacrifice, borne overwhelmingly by workers whose individual names and stories are, for the most part, no longer remembered or recorded, in the same way that Khufu's individual pyramid workers or Eiffel's individual riveters are also largely lost to history, remembered only in aggregate through worker housing sites, cemetery records, and the patient, careful excavation work of historians who have worked in more recent decades to properly document and honor this often overlooked chapter of the canal's construction. Beyond its cost in human lives and beyond the engineering achievement itself, it's worth slowing down to appreciate just how dramatically this 50-mile shortcut reshaped global trade and travel patterns once it finally opened in 1914. Before the canal, a ship traveling from New York to San Francisco needed to sail the entire length of both American continents, rounding the notoriously dangerous waters of Cape Horn at South America's southern tip, a journey of roughly 13,000 miles, taking many weeks and exposing crews to some of the most treacherous sailing conditions found anywhere on Earth. After the canal opened, that same journey shrank to roughly 5,000 miles, a reduction of more than 60%, accomplished through a passage that could typically be completed within a single day, rather than many weeks. This dramatic shortening rippled outward through global shipping and trade patterns almost immediately. Shipping companies redrew their routes. Naval strategists reconsidered how quickly fleets could move between the Atlantic and Pacific in the event of conflict. Insurance rates for maritime cargo shifted, reflecting the reduced time and risk involved in journeys that could now avoid Cape Horn's genuinely dangerous waters entirely. Agricultural and industrial regions on America's west coast gained considerably easier access to Eastern markets and to Europe, and vice versa, contributing to economic development patterns that continued unfolding for decades after the canal's completion, in ways the original engineers focused primarily on the immediate challenge of actually building the thing could hardly have fully anticipated at the outset. Even today, over a century later, global shipping routes continue to be shaped directly by the canal's existence and capacity. The very language of modern shipping, Panamax and Neo-Panamax, vessel classifications we touched on earlier tonight, reflects just how thoroughly this single 50-mile passage continues to influence decisions made by shipbuilders and trade planners across the entire world. A quiet, ongoing legacy considerably larger in scope than the physical locks at the lake themselves. Following its completion in 1914, the canal remained under direct American administration and control for over 8 decades, operating as a vital piece of global shipping infrastructure, shortening the journey between America's Atlantic and Pacific coasts and international shipping routes more broadly by thousands of miles compared to the alternative route around South America. Following decades of negotiation and reflecting the same kind of broader post-colonial shifts that reshaped many parts of the world through the 20th century, the United States and Panama signed treaties in 1977 establishing a gradual transfer of canal control back to Panama, culminating in full Panamanian sovereignty over the canal on December 31, 1999. Since assuming full control, Panama has continued operating and expanding the canal, most significantly through a major expansion project completed in 2016, adding a new, considerably larger set of locks alongside the original century-old system, allowing significantly larger modern cargo ships, vessels far larger than anything the original 1914 designers could have anticipated, to transit the canal for the first time. This expansion project deserves its own moment of quiet attention tonight, since it represents a genuinely fascinating conversation across more than a century of engineering history. The ships that inspired the canal's original 1914 dimensions, now referred to as Panamax vessels, were themselves designed specifically around the maximum size the original locks could accommodate, meaning the canal, for much of the 20th century, actively shaped the very design of the ships built to use it, rather than simply accommodating whatever ships happened to already exist. By the early 21st century, global shipping had evolved considerably, with a new generation of considerably larger cargo vessels, sometimes called New Panamax or Neo-Panamax ships, being built specifically in anticipation of the Canal's planned expansion, once again demonstrating this same reciprocal relationship between the Canal's engineering and the broader shipbuilding industry it continues to influence. The 2016 expansion required constructing an entirely new set of locks, using a more modern design incorporating water-saving basins that recycle a significant portion of the water used during each transit, reducing the enormous quantities of fresh water the expanded system would otherwise require, an important consideration given ongoing questions about long-term water supply for both the Canal's operations and the broader Panamanian population that depends on many of the same water sources. This modern engineering achievement, impressive as it genuinely is, still operates alongside, rather than replacing, the original century-old lock system, which continues functioning today, largely unchanged from its 1914 design, still relying on gravity alone to move water between chambers, a remarkable testament to just how sound the original engineering proved to be. More than 100 years after workers like Estelle first began pouring its concrete walls. Remarkably, the original locks, dam, and much of the core infrastructure, completed back in 1914, remain in active operation today, still functioning largely as originally designed, still relying on the same basic gravity-fed water system that required no pumps back when Gorgas was still working to control the region's mosquito population over a century ago. Today, the Canal handles a significant percentage of global maritime trade. Ships from around the world scheduling their routes months in advance around Canal transit slots, generating substantial toll revenue that has become a genuinely significant part of Panama's national economy since gaining full control of this remarkable piece of infrastructure their own land once hosted, but did not, for the Canal's first 8 decades, actually govern. Let's slow down once more and follow a single modern-day transit through the Canal, guided by one of the specially trained Canal pilots whose job it is to safely bring every single ship through this remarkable century-old system. Every vessel transiting the Canal, regardless of its home country or its captain's own experience, is required to hand over navigational control to a licensed Panama Canal pilot for the duration of the transit, a reflection of just how much specialized local knowledge is required to safely guide often enormous modern vessels through channels and locks originally designed over a century ago. Our pilot today, we'll call him Ernesto, representing the many skilled Panamanian professionals who now perform this role, a marked change from the American-dominated pilot corps of the Canals of earlier decades under United States administration. Boards an enormous container ship near the Atlantic entrance early in the morning, joining the ship's own captain and crew on the bridge. Ernesto's job requires an intimate, detailed familiarity with every turn, every depth marking, every quirk of the canal's current operating conditions. Knowledge built up over years of training and supervised transits before a pilot is trusted to guide vessels independently. As the ship approaches Gatun locks, Ernesto coordinates carefully with lock operators and the small electric locomotives, known affectionately as mules, that run along tracks beside the lock chambers, their steel cables attached to the ship to help keep it centered and steady within the narrow lock walls. Since a vessel this size, even under its own power, could not reliably maintain its exact position using its own engines alone within such a tightly confined space. The lock chambers fill with water gently, gradually, the enormous ship rising almost imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably until it has climbed the full height required to reach the level of Gatun Lake beyond. Once through the locks, the ship proceeds across the calm, wide waters of the lake itself, passing near Barrow, Colorado Island's protected shores, before eventually reaching the Culebra Cut. Still, even after a century, one of the narrowest and most carefully navigated sections of the entire transit, requiring Ernesto's full attention as the ship moved through the same channel once carved by Samuel and his fellow steam shovel operators over 100 years earlier. By early evening, after a full day's transit, the ship reaches the Pacific side, passing through Pedro Miguel and Miraflores locks in sequence, gradually descending back to sea level. Before Ernesto finally disembarks, his responsibility for this particular vessel complete, ready to be assigned to another ship, another transit, another full day's careful, practiced guidance through a system whose basic engineering has remained fundamentally unchanged since Estelle and her fellow workers first poured its concrete walls more than a century before. Even today, the Panama Canal holds a handful of small, pleasant curiosities worth sitting with before we begin tonight's closing reflection. Ships transiting the canal pay tolls calculated based on their size and cargo, and these tolls can be genuinely enormous for the largest modern vessels, sometimes exceeding several $100,000 for a single transit. Though this considerable expense still typically proves far cheaper than the additional fuel, time, and risk involved in sailing the long alternative route around South America. The smallest toll ever recorded, by contrast, was paid in 1928 by an American adventurer named Richard Halliburton, who swam the entire length of the canal himself and was charged a toll of just 36 cents, calculated based on his own body weight using the same per-ton calculation method applied to actual cargo ships. Gatun Lake, created specifically to serve as the canal's elevated passage, remains, even today, one of the largest man-made lakes in the world and has developed its own thriving ecosystem over the past century, home to considerable wildlife, including crocodiles and a wide variety of tropical fish species that have adapted to this century-old artificial habitat as though it were simply an ordinary, naturally occurring lake. One particular corner of this lake deserves special mention tonight. Barrow, Colorado Island, a piece of high ground that before the valley's flooding stood as an ordinary hilltop within the Chagres River Valley. As the waters of Gatun Lake gradually rose during construction, this hilltop became isolated as an island, surrounded entirely by the newly formed lake. Rather than remaining simply an incidental byproduct of the dam's construction, Barrow, Colorado Island was set aside in 1923 as a nature reserve and scientific research station, and has since become one of the most intensively studied areas of tropical rainforest anywhere in the world, hosting researchers from around the globe studying everything from tropical ecology to animal behavior, continuously for over a century. There's a quiet, pleasing irony in this outcome worth sitting with for a moment. An engineering decision made specifically to solve a canal construction problem, flooding a valley, rather than fighting directly against Panama as mountainous terrain, inadvertently created one of the world's most valuable and enduring sites for scientific research into the very tropical ecosystem the canal's builders spent a decade struggling against. Its heat, its disease, its overwhelming, persistent vegetation. The engineers who dammed the Chagres River in 1913 were focused entirely on solving an immediate, practical construction problem. They could hardly have anticipated that the small hilltop being surrounded by their rising lake would, a century later, still be quietly, continuously teaching scientists new things about the very jungle that once so thoroughly complicated their own work. The canal's original steel lock gates, installed back in the early 1910s, remained in continuous operation for over a century before requiring their first major replacement, a testament to the remarkable durability of the original engineering and construction quality achieved by workers using tools and techniques considerably simpler than those available to the canal's 2016 expansion project. And perhaps most strikingly of all, ships transiting the canal from the Atlantic to the Pacific side actually travel for a portion of their journey in a generally southeastward direction rather than the westward direction one might intuitively expect, a quirk resulting from the specific curved shape of the isthmus at this particular location, and a small, genuine surprise that still catches many first-time visitors and even some ship captains slightly off guard. Tonight's story carries a particular shape worth sitting with quietly before we close. Not one continuous, uninterrupted success, the way our previous episodes largely unfolded, but rather a story of genuine failure, followed by careful, patient learning, followed finally by success. The pyramid, the Eiffel Tower, and the International Space Station, in our previous episodes, each represented largely a single, sustained, ultimately successful construction effort, however difficult along the way. The Panama Canal, by contrast, required an entire failed attempt first. It's an experienced, confident engineering team, fresh from genuine triumph at Suez, applying the wrong design to an unfamiliar environment at a cost of billions of francs and, far more importantly, tens of thousands of human lives. Only after this costly failure, and only after entirely new scientific understanding emerged regarding how tropical diseases actually spread, did a second attempt succeed, not simply through greater effort or more advanced machinery, but through a fundamentally different, more carefully adapted approach, informed directly by the specific, hard-won lessons of the earlier failure. It's worth pausing on just how many separate lessons needed to verge before this second, attempt could actually succeed, since no single insight alone would have been sufficient. The medical understanding of mosquito-borne disease transmission needed to be established first, through Ronald Ross and Walter Reed's research, entirely independent of any engineering consideration. The lock-based design needed to be chosen over the sea-level approach, a decision requiring genuine humility on the part of American engineers, willing to depart from what might have seemed to less careful planners, like simply finishing the French sea-level design that already existed on paper. The railway infrastructure needed complete rebuilding, providing the logistical backbone, without which the massive excavation at Culebra Cut could never have proceeded at the pace it eventually achieved. And leadership needed to remain stable and continuously present, as we saw with Goethals, allowing thousands of individual daily decisions to be made quickly and consistently, rather than through slow, distant bureaucratic processes. Remove any single one of these pieces, and it's entirely plausible the American effort might have suffered a fate similar to the French attempt before it. Perhaps not identical, but similarly costly, similarly prone to failure, similarly at the mercy of a jungle and climate that had already defeated one confident, well-funded engineering effort. There's a gentle, honest thought worth carrying with you into sleep tonight, drawn from this particular story. Not every ambitious undertaking succeeds on the first attempt, no matter how experienced or confident its builders may be. Sometimes, genuine success requires an earlier failure first, not as a source of shame, but as a source of essential, hard-won information, without which the eventual, successful attempt might never have found its way to the right approach at all. The mosquitoes that doomed the French effort and the disease they carried taught the eventual builders something the engineering plans alone never could have revealed. That sometimes the most important problem to solve isn't the one that looks like engineering at all. And so, slowly, very slowly, our canal is complete. Every lock tested, every mosquito patiently, systematically controlled, every landslide cleared and cleared again, however many times the mountain demanded it. Every failure from the first attempt, carefully studied and finally carefully corrected. If you're still awake, that's all right. There's no need to follow the story any further tonight. There's nothing left to build, nothing left to dig or dam or dynamite into place. Just let it rest now, the way the canal itself rests each night. Its lock gates closed and still, Gatun Lake calm and dark beneath a tropical sky, waiting quietly for tomorrow's ships. Somewhere, right now, far across an ocean, or perhaps just a short distance from wherever you are lying comfortably tonight, a ship may be gliding slowly through locks, rising gently, gently toward the calm surface of a lake that was once, a little over a century ago, an ordinary river valley before careful, patient engineers decided to let it rise instead. Somewhere in that same lake, crocodiles rest quietly beneath dark water that was once dry jungle floor. An entire ecosystem settled comfortably into a home humans built by accident, simply by choosing to flood a valley rather than fight against it. Somewhere along the canal's edge, the jungle continues pressing in gently, exactly as it always has, exactly as it once did to the abandoned French equipment, patient and unhurried, content to wait as long as it takes. Somewhere in Barbados, in Jamaica, in the quiet Caribbean towns where so many workers once departed for Panama, their descendants carry forward family stories of grandfathers and great-grandfathers who helped pour the very concrete still holding back Gatun Lake today. Names mostly unrecorded in any official history, remembered instead in the quieter, more enduring way that families remember the people who came before them. Somewhere in a small Panamanian archive, old photographs remain carefully preserved, showing steam shovels and dynamite crews and hospital wards with carefully screened windows, a visual record of the years when a single mosquito posed a greater threat to this project than any engineering challenge ever could. Somewhere too, in quiet Barbadian villages, much like the one Joseph once left behind, elderly descendants still tell stories passed down across generations of grandfathers who crossed an ocean for the promise of steady work, and who, in their own small, largely unrecorded way, helped move a mountain and raise a lake, one shovel load, one bucket of concrete at a time. Nothing to build tonight, nothing to dig, nothing to dam, just stillness, just water, just time moving slowly, patiently, the way it always has, over locks, over lakes, over a mountain that once tried, again and again, to refill the very cut carved through its center. Let your breathing slow, the way a ship slows gently as it settles into a lock chamber. Let your body rest, the way water rests calm and still behind a closed gate. Let your thoughts drift quietly away, the way a boat drifts gently across a calm, lamp-lit lake, with nowhere urgent left to be. Think, if you'd like, of the pyramid, still standing in its ancient desert, 4,500 years of patient stillness. Think of the tower standing quietly above Paris, swaying gently in a night breeze, exactly as its calculations always intended. Think of the station circling quietly overhead, 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets, every single day, forever falling and never landing. And think, tonight, of the Canal, not standing still at all, but flowing gently, continuously. Ships rising and falling through its locks in an endless, patient rhythm. Water finding its level, the same quiet way it always has, long before any engineer ever arrived to guide it. 4 structures, 4 very different relationships with time and stillness and motion. And yet each one, in its own way, tells a version of the same quiet story. That the most enormous, most seemingly impossible undertakings are, in the end, simply the accumulated result of thousands of small, patient decisions, made correctly, one at a time, by people whose individual names mostly fade from memory, long before the thing they built finally does. Somewhere tonight, a lock gate is closing quietly on a ship that has no memory of Samuel, or Estelle, or Goethals, or Gorgas, or the 22,000 workers whose names were never recorded at all. The ship doesn't need to remember them. The water doesn't need to remember them. The gate simply closes the way it was built to close, the way it has closed thousands upon thousands of times before, carrying forward quietly the accumulated result of their patient work, whether anyone tonight happens to be thinking of them or not. That perhaps is its own kind of rest too, not to be endlessly remembered, but simply to have mattered once, in a way solid and lasting enough that the world simply continued benefiting from it long after the memory of exactly who did the work has gently, naturally faded. And all four, tonight, continuing quietly to exist, exactly as their builders eventually left them, asking nothing more of the world than to be allowed to continue a little longer, doing exactly what they were so carefully, patiently built to do. There is nothing left to hold up tonight except your own tired, comfortable body. Nothing left to calculate. Nothing left to build. Just this quiet moment, and the next one, and the next, rising and settling gently the way a ship rises and settles gently within a lock chamber, water finding its own calm level, patiently, softly, until everything finally comes to rest. Rest now. This has been Sleepy Construction. Good night.